Hello, everyone, and welcome to Voice Like a Lion podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Pemberton, and today I'm really excited to have a conversation with somebody who is a transplant from LA, now in Clearwater, Florida. And I have Riggs Eckelberry. He is the founder of Origin Clear, a public company that is redefining the water industry as we know it. He also has created a process to optimize for success called mistake-based marketing. I'm very interested in that. Welcome to the show, Riggs.
Stephen, it's a great pleasure. And it was so interesting talking about your background as a Hawaiian who somehow transplanted to Tulsa. And I love that those American stories, right? So yeah, and it has a lot to do with my own discontinuity in my life. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have this conversation just for a multitude of reasons. I mean, for me, that being a Hawaiian, I'm a fish out of water here in the middle of the United States, and that's for real. I mean, Tulsa, there is no body of water that I can go to. We have a pond, and that's about it. But if I was to compare waterfront views, I'm pretty sure you would have a much better one than me. But and speaking of water, especially speaking of water, that is what you specialize in. How did you like water? Why water? I just think that that's such a fascinating industry to go into, especially in today's day and age. Like for me, I've been in digital marketing, been in e-commerce. That's the hot thing. It's been hot for a long time, but why water? That's just such a different industry.
Well, I actually got dragged kicking and screaming into it. Uh, and here's the issue. First of all, just a fast recap. I
Yeah.
spent, first 10 years after high school working in the nonprofit space. As part of that, at some point, I ended up as a ship captain, and I was had a career for a while in the South Pacific on tramp steamers. It was like
Oh wow.
this little loop. But I love what I'm saying is I love the ocean.
Yeah.
To me, even though I love sailing more than motor, but just being out in the water is amazing for me. But I finally realized, like, you know what? I like being around people. And so I made a move to come back to the US and become a marketer. Marketed in the early 80s for the same online nonprofit organization, but ultimately ended up in New York City because I got the technology bug. I felt that technology is, Elon Musk talks about it as a double-edged sword, right?
Mhm.
But it has a potential for good along with potential for evil. And if you think about ways to accelerate resolving problems we have with all kinds of issues in our world, technology is the enabler. And so I built an early career in New York City doing the early computerizing of businesses there. And that was not really my thing. And frankly, I ended up giving the business away and kind of restarting into the 90s in LA. So the computer business was in New York. Now I find myself in LA. And through a series of coincidences, I ended up right in the middle of the dot-com boom. And I loved it. For me, computers were no longer about computing, but about communication, right? You and I are using a glorified calculator, but we're using it to communicate. How cool is that, right? So I fell in love with that and had starting in 1995, went on a 10-year ride for the first time really becoming corporate and ending up at the C-level, taking a company onto the NASDAQ as the number 2. And then I had the opportunity to do what all number 2s want to do, which is become number 1. And I said to a fund, I said, can you use me as a CEO? And they said, yeah, we think we have something, but we're not doing tech anymore. We're doing green. And by green, they meant literally green. They wanted me to do algae for biofuels. And of course, you know that petroleum is old algae, right? It's not dinosaurs. There were not enough dinosaurs. I mean, there may be a couple in there, but mostly it's these giant layers of algae that grew a long time ago to suck up all the CO2 in the air and then died. And over time became these oil deposits. Now, that was wonderful. It was a lot of fun. I had the best time doing it. I was the darling of mainstream media. Back then we had mainstream media, which is kind of interesting. Like Stuart Varney, I'll call you Algae Man. That was kind of, it was fun. But here's what happened. Fracking dropped the price of oil from $120 a barrel. Think about it. Even now it's only 80, but back then it was $120 a barrel, all the way down below 50. And we're like, hey, we don't have a business anymore. We're back to being a science experiment. And so rather than give up, because I'd given up in the 80s and I was like, not going to do that again, we decided to pivot. And by then I'd also worked out all this mistake-based marketing that the one sheet talks about. And so we started experimenting with the water industry. Why? Because removing algae from water is very similar to removing sewage from water. They're microscopic particles, there's a purification process, etc. But what I found was the same reason I didn't want to be in water in the first place is why nobody else wanted to be in it. It was really boring, nothing going on, very, very government, very municipal, nothing going on. But over time, we found out that there's major, major problems in water, and that the infrastructure in the United States runs $100 billion behind every year, which means that in 10 years, you're at $1 trillion, right, of unmet infrastructure requirements. Now, I don't care how much money they're going to print. They're not going to print enough to do $1 trillion for water. So what are you going to do? And that's when I got religion, which was decentralization. 90% of all water usage in the US, and in fact all over the world, is industry and agriculture. Now, the ratios are different. Like in Somalia, it's mostly agriculture. And in, Germany, it's more industry. But in America, it's about half and half, right? Industry and agriculture. But it's 90% of all the usage is either one of those two giants. So if you want to solve a problem, don't go for the 10%, go for the 90%. In other words, don't try to help the households because that won't move the needle. But if you help the businesses, then you have a chance to do something, because what we decided to do was unburden the centralized system. The whole notion of centralizing is a very 50s concept, with mainframes and landlines and all that stuff. When in actual fact, if you have technology, do it, on the right where, I'm sitting here in a home office, right? That is decentralized. I'm in a decentralized office. Why not do that with water? And back in 2016, when I became the prophet in the wilderness, it was not a very people were like, whatever. But now it's caught up, and big companies are starting to do their own water treatment, like PepsiCo and a lot of chip fabricators and so forth. So it's become a thing. Well, what we did starting in 2016 is we started building capabilities to service that market. And so we started starting with the giant, start with the giant clients, right? Because it's kind of, we just got a $5 million PO. Okay, check, right? So that was good. But then we launched a company called Modular Water Systems, which is these pods, water treatment pods that go all the way down to like a 500 square foot footprint. So now you can deploy them anywhere. You can just go, here, you got a problem? Drop the pod in, treat your water. And so now we started servicing the decentralized water industry. Now, where is that industry? It's right now at the very tippy beginning of it, which is the people who don't have a choice. They're getting fined, like they're a trailer park, they're getting fined. Yeah. They got to do something. That's been our market for the last 3-4 years. But in 2020, we realized that not everybody's got capital. And COVID kind of early COVID, we didn't know that there was going to be a giant bailout, and we figured there was going to be a capital problem. And so we said, what if we made it possible for investors to fund these water treatment systems, and kind of like you're in Oklahoma, you know all about the oil wells, and there's master limited partnerships where people invest in baskets of energy properties, be they pipelines, gas fields, oil wells, etc. Right? So the MLP model is basically a profit sharing model, And we thought, well, why don't we do that? Why don't we enable investors to fund the same thing for water? Now I can go to you, Stephen, and let's say you've got a brewery and the local municipality is telling you, we can't take your water, truck it to another county. Now you can just do your own. And not only that, you don't have to pay, just pay as you go. Just like you're accustomed to, you stay on the meter. You run the meter with the city, and now you're on the meter with us. So it's frictionless. To you, it's say, well, okay, I got a machine in my facility, but it's not mine. And it treats the water and I pay as I go and everything's good. Now, what are the benefits of that? Number one, inflation is a giant problem in water today. Water and sewage rates are inflating faster than college tuition or health services.
Well,
it's horrendous. And guess what? It's not solving the problem. It's just causing a lot of people to not pay their water bills. And then they get disconnected, and now they're on bottled water, which is even worse. So that's basically a major inflation problem. So for businesses to have their own water system, now they can control that cost, right? Because the machine costs so much, and you run the machine, and there you are, right? You have ordinary inflation of electricity or whatever, but you don't have a giant municipal inflation because municipalities trying to deal with all these unpaid bills, so they're raising your rates, right? So the business goes off the grid, gets its own system, controls inflation. Second thing is they can now recycle their water, because in America, less than 1% of all water is recycled. Israel recycles almost 90%.
Wow.
Well, what the heck? I mean, we basically have this wasting model, like, oh, we'll just take the water and throw it away. We treat it. I'm not saying we don't treat it, but it's wasted, right? And then we complain we got droughts, right? Now, there's one place in America that does a good job, and that's Las Vegas. Las Vegas does a really good job because they had to. They were like, we're stuck. We're not going to have a city if we don't conserve. But what you have to do outside of Vegas, you basically have no one able or willing to recycle water unless they are already treating it at the place. I'm a brewery. I'm making this water dirty. I've got effluent. I can reuse it after I treat it. If I send it to the city, it's never coming back.
Yeah.
So that was the second major reason. Third major reason is the government is out of my hair. And that's actually becoming a major motivation, that as long as I meet permit requirements, the government's not going to bother me. And that's actually a driver of these companies doing their own water treatment, right? And it's a beautiful thing, because now you're creating 1,000 points of light. Instead of one central system that's trying to do everything, you're spreading out the load. And guess what? The central system can now service regular people, residential, because it's not overwhelmed by all that business use. And so it's a win-win all around. And what's happening is we're doing we're breaking up a monopoly, right? It used to be all government. Now it's becoming private enterprise. One thing that people think, they immediately go, well, water's free. You can't take the water away. I'm like, no. We still believe the government should be the source of the clean water. We're not saying that. We think privatizing sources of clean water is a bad idea, terrible idea. Where it's been tried, it's been a disaster. We're talking about cleaning the dirty water, which is actually a bigger problem when you think about it, right? And EPA is now saying to all the cities, you better clean up all that, it's called PFAS, is all the Teflon stuff and so forth, forever chemicals. But it's an unfunded mandate. Well, guess what? It's coming from industry. So make industry take care of the problem, right? And that's really what it's about, is that we're enabling industry and agriculture to get a win by taking them off the grid, and also make them responsible citizens and relieve the burden on municipalities so they can do the residential, which is the common good. And now rates won't skyrocket, and it kind of works out. So that's what we're about. That's our mission. And it's kind of exciting people. People are finding water to not be boring anymore.
I mean, when you put it like that, I find water to be much more interesting, because I've never heard it articulated that way. And it's just a concept that makes a lot of sense to me, especially in places like, if you guys, Chattanooga, Tennessee, is where I'm originally from. Chattanooga, Tennessee is blowing up in terms of breweries. Like there's one that feels like on every corner. So just through your example, I could see how that would be very useful because then you're keeping everything in house. You mentioned PepsiCo. PepsiCo is a big client. For me, I used to work at PepsiCo, so I understand what they do with their water and water treatment and all that. So for me, is I can see definitely for a lot of these kind of companies why they would do it because it just makes sense to me. It makes sense that you would keep it in house, that you would recycle it, you would reuse what you're already using instead of well, I'm gonna send this out hoping that it comes back and then I'm gonna get it back and then do it because that I think that's such an interesting concept because I think of it in the same way that I think about how I've been learning and seeing a lot about different things when it comes to money because and especially when you digitize it. Like if I go and I take $1,000 in cash and I go and I deposit into a bank, you would think I've got $1,000 in cash in there. But I heard this story from a gentleman and he's very successful and he's a multimillionaire and he went to go get a $500,000 out. He just wanted to get a 500,000 out. He's like, that's well inside of what I have in there. And he said that when he went to the teller said, well, you had to put this form in. So he goes and he puts a form in, then he comes back and they tell him, well, we're sorry, we had a problem getting the money out, so we can only get you 250,000. And he said, how? It's my money. And he literally pulled up his app and he said, it says right here, I have this amount of money. I should be able to get 500,000 out. But the thing that people don't understand is that you're putting your money in and then the bank is taking it and doing something with it. It's not sitting there like it used to be back in the 50s and hopefully back in the 50s and 60s. And you used to actually be in a vault and you used to be able to go and get your money out. That's not the way it is anymore. When you digitize that money, it goes out and you just hope that you can get it back. That's why people, whenever banks shut down, they lose all their money. It's because the banks over leverage those funds, that money. So when I think of it that way, when you talk about it in the water aspect, it's very fascinating to me because I can see how it could be very similar. Where it's like you're sending it out, but if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you look at Colorado when they went through the really bad drought not too long ago. You send your water out because you're not recycling it in house. Now all of a sudden you might not get it back. It might go out and never return.
You got it. You hit the nail on the head. And I think the businesses are starting to see the water risk as a major corporate risk that they have to pay attention to, a strategic risk, right?
Yeah.
And here's the other thing that's going on. Last night I was on on an X space, and I was listening to Grant Cardone, and he said, I'm investing $2.6 billion in trailer parks. And I went, wow, that's interesting. Because let me tell you something. First of all, mobile home parks are a booming business because why? Because everybody's going broke.
Yeah.
And so people are moving down, and trailer parks are kind of the last stop before homeless. But in fact, trailer parks, mobile home parks can be very, very nice, right? The one big problem they all have is sanitation. They typically have either septic tanks or lagoons. Neither is a good solution. And now the state environmental agencies are coming down hard on the trailer parks and saying, you better upgrade your sanitation. And usually the city doesn't want to receive that effluent and they're stuck. And so we started doing, with our modular water division, we started servicing mobile home parks. But now we are about to launch this pay-as-you-go thing, which we call Water on Demand, for trailer parks in West Central Texas. And that's kind of going to be our pilot area. And there are tens of thousands of trailer parks. And they all have roughly the same need, which is we've created a 5,000 gallon per day pod that's been pre-approved by the state of Texas that people aren't going to have to pay for. So all of a sudden you go, we got a water problem. The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ, is going to start fining us. Oh, we'll just take one of those. Thank you. And it's over. 2 weeks later, there's a unit on site treating our water, and we're done. Think about the relief it is for that, for the operator of the trailer park, but also the investors behind it, right? And then you have giant investors like Grant Cardone coming along with $2.6 billion. They too want to know that water is not going to be a risk. So that's become for us it's kind of like, when I was in tech, we were always looking for the killer app. For us, mobile home parks are the killer app, and that's exciting.
I think that's something I never would have expected until you saying that. Just because there's a gentleman that I know, which that may be an interesting introduction. Honestly, is he owns. This is what he said. Is like he said, I bought land and it turned into a mobile home park. And he turned it in. He's had it for a very long time now. But I just thought, why that? It's like this seems like such an interesting concept. And he said, honestly, it's a great investment. He said because you really just you own the land. It's like then you just if you need to remove them, you just literally can remove them if you need to. But I just think that it's especially in your industry and in your space, that one thing because and I'm sure that you have a much bigger global strategy and this is how you're going to do things overseas or whatever it may be. But I just find that one piece fascinating because it's the one area that you've identified as a public company that's your biggest lever. That's your your highest leverage opportunity right now is trailer parks. How did you discover trailer parks? Like, was that your initial thought? Was like, hey, this is the first thing we're going after is trailer parks.
It's never like that. You know that, right?
Yes,
Uh,
exactly.
what life happens to you while you're making other plans, right?
Yes.
So what it was I, as I was telling you before the show,
Yeah.
we moved to Clearwater from Los Angeles along with a bunch of parents because my wife has a small school, and one of those families was stuck with an Alabama trailer park that they could not get rid of. Why? Because of the sanitation requirement that the state of Alabama was requiring, and they couldn't. Nobody would solve their problem. Nobody. So we just stupidly decided to help, and it was the worst project ever because here's the problem with it. Most trailer parks at the low end have lagoons. A lagoon is just where all the poop goes. Now, that lagoon is green and ugly, but more importantly, it's not a lot of water, it's a lot of sediment. How do you treat that? And we went through the most god-awful learning experience trying to figure out how to treat basically mud, how to treat mud.
Yeah.
And we figured it out. And our friends, they managed to, we got the job done. We lost money. They lost months, et cetera, but they got the property sold. They were happy. And we had, we'd solved a problem, and then more started showing up. We did another one. And now this was an interesting case where the owner of the mobile home park, she was faced with this state was going to shut her down. So in order to buy the sanitation, she gave away half of her mobile home park to solve the problem. Now, we hadn't yet come up with this water as a service. We were just selling units. So we sold her the unit, and she was like half happy, half sad because solved the problem, but now I only have half of the mobile home park. And that really illustrates the need for capital help in the space because a lot of these are mom and pops.
Yeah.
Right. And like your friend, he built one, right? Well,
Okay.
there's people out there building 1,000, but there's just as many out there with 2 or 3. And those people are thinly capitalized. So we realized this is a great market. And then we created Water on Demand, which, by the way, and I'm not going to get into it because we're currently putting it through the SEC, but Water on Demand is being acquired by a blank check company that's on the NASDAQ. And hopefully once that's done, it will have the capital to really do this in a big way. But so I'm not going to get into that because, it's kind of, whatever. But meanwhile, we hooked up with a group in West Central Texas called Environment Maintenance that do the maintenance for a whole bunch of these. And they got excited because they wanted to upgrade everybody from those septic tanks or lagoons to the full end-to-end sanitation. And so we got into a partnership. And we are now working on our first model home, but it's a model mobile home park that will demonstrate this, including the pay-as-you-go, where you don't have to buy the actual unit, which is, after all, a $500,000 unit.
Yeah. I think that's such a beautiful, to me, it's really beautiful because you guys are a publicly traded company. And a lot of my listeners are like small, medium-sized businesses or investors. But a lot of the same concepts apply. I mean, I just had a conversation with my business partner this morning about finding more strategic partners. I mean, you guys found a strategic partner in West Central Texas, and and that's the power of it, right? So you guys found one strategic partner that was in the right area, they have the right connections, they're in the space that you are looking to break into, and you're able to create that, and now it's helping you break into that space. And I love how you have talked about all of these different aspects of the water industry and even just business in general. For those listening, there's so many different things that he's talked about so far that you can pick up and apply to your business. You don't have to be in water. But I'm very curious, like, where can people find out more about you and how can they connect? So if there's somebody like my buddy who may be listening to this who has a trailer park home, how can they get in contact if they want something like this?
All right. Well, I'm going to give you the secret sauce
Ooh,
because
secret sauce.
you can go to the operating division. You can send an email to water@originclear.com, or there's forms you can fill out. But I'll give you the secret password, and that is when you come to Origin Clear, sign up for one of my Thursday night briefings. And every Thursday night, we've done 250 of these.
Wow.
We started January 16th, 2020, right, when it all began, and when our lives changed. And we've been doing them every Thursday night, and we do a whole bunch of videos, etc. But we have a free for all when the team gets together, the execs, and we just basically throw the football around, and your friend can jump in and put a comment in. We then take those comments and we comment on them, and then most importantly, they'll be able to discuss their need, and they'll be talking to the people who are talking to investors. And I guarantee you, the side of a business is talking to investors is always the most dynamic side. I guarantee you, because it's really hard work. It's hard to right now, for example, we are funding not only our own development of this new stuff. And by the way, modular water and our operating divisions have been profitable, but creating these new markets costs money. But in addition, we're funding this whole blank check company, NASDAQ, thingamajigger, and that's pretty exciting. So we actually have a lot of, we're super interested in making water on demand have its first showcase, and your friend should jump in on that, be on my participants list in Zoom, and bring up some comments. We can discuss it online, follow up afterwards, and that's really the way to go. And it's a lot of fun going on those briefings because we basically discuss everything. We're wide open. What you and I are talking about, we go even deeper, and how it relates to, for example, inflation or whatever it is that we're talking about that week. And that's and then this really cool thing. Week by week, we will be building this showcase of mobile home parks, which I'm super excited about. Now, it ain't the only one. RV campgrounds are burning hot right now. There's a number of spaces that are really on fire. And again, RV campgrounds is another way that people are finding ways to live without spending a whole lot of money, right? So there's a whole lot of innovation going on in real estate at the low end where they need sanitation help. And even in regular housing developments, we have in North Texas a huge land boom, and they're building way ahead of the sewage plants. So they just drop in one of their pods and that's it. They don't have to worry about it. And I tell you, people love the concept. We have a guru, Dan Early, who was doing this long before it was a thing. He was doing it 20 years ago. And now, of course, everybody thinks he's wonderful. Well, he was, like me, a prophet in the wilderness. And, it's just, and my company, I started this company in 2007 in the algae industry. We are now the 16-year overnight success.
Yeah.
And isn't that the truth, Stephen, that everybody who ends up successful has had to eat dirt along the way so much, and nobody realizes that. They don't get it.
No, they don't. That's the one thing. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that, because that's something I talk about all the time. And that actually will lead me into that one question that I told you about. But before I get to my one question is, that's what I talk about all the time is if you're building something and you're building something that you want to be sustainable, something that actually is really helping people, it's like going up Mount Everest on your face, and Mount Everest is made out of glass. Like sometimes it just feels like building a business is really difficult. It feels like you're eating dirt for 16 years. But that's where you got to choose what your heart's going to be. I mean, there's so many different ways to look at it, because you could have looked at it and say, you know what, it's not worth this. They'll figure it out. It's like, water, I'll send it out and it'll come back. Like water's water. It'll always be around. We'll do something with it. But you decided to do something different. You decided to stay in the industry, and now you're reaping your rewards. Now you're the overnight success. But I'm very thankful you shared that, because I think that especially my generation and younger, they're over sensationalized by the overnight success. They see the quick success. They're trying to make, everyone online is how to make $10,000 in a month. Hey, here's your first $100,000 in a year. And it's like, those are great numbers, but A, $100,000 does not go near as far as it used to. And B, is realistically, if you make $100,000, depending on what industry you're in, you're not making any money. For me, being in the online space, $100,000 in the e-commerce space where you're selling physical products, if you're at 10% margins, you made $10,000 in a year. You made nothing. You're better off staying in your job and getting a raise than going and starting a company. But most people don't realize that. They just think, well, they made $1 million. They got to be doing so well. It's like, but what was their margins? They're not talking about profit. They're talking about revenue. So just thank you again for sharing that piece.
And especially in spaces like Amazon, where Amazon takes 30%, I mean, those margins disappear like crazy. There's no, you have to be on fire to make it these days. And for us, really, and this is where this mistake-based marketing philosophy of mine comes in, is just a broken field running. You're constantly looking for, wait, what about this? Does this work? Does this work? And eventually we figured out this decentralized water thing, but it was trial and error, a lot of error. And you have to be willing to able to survive the errors. That's the truth, right? Because if you're going to do mistake-based marketing, those mistakes hurt, right?
Yeah.
Survey says that didn't work. So that it takes so much. The good news is that we did finally find a point of leverage that could move the needle in the water industry, which is local action, direct action by local businesses. That is, as opposed to trying to get, Miami-Dade to spend $5 billion on something. Good luck. No, get, a bunch of breweries or trailer parks or whatever. Just get, and it works by having, an application in a particular vertical like breweries, and then a whole string of them, or mobile home parks, a whole string of them. And you start having this clusters of, because the key is standardization, right? So if you can get really, really good at a particular vertical, you get known in that vertical, and then everybody calls you up and you're rolling. And hopefully we're going to have the capital soon to be able to pre-build these. So now a mobile home park calls me from Austin or whatever, and they say, we need this. And they're, well, okay, you need to build the pad, put water and electricity. And when you got that, we're going to deliver it. When are you going to deliver it? When you have the water and electricity and the pad. That's when we're going to deliver it, because it's sitting there on the lot. And I cannot wait for that, because it's going to be just like the Model T days. You can have any color as long as it's black. You get a 5,000 gallon per day unit. That's what you get, whether you're big or small. It's, if you're really, really big, you get 2 of them, fine. But it keeps life simple. And I think it's the only way we can do it is by tremendously standardizing things. Here's another thing that I really admire in what Elon Musk did with Tesla. I heard Ford the other day, they were saying how they can't possibly write their own software because they have 150 vendors. Tesla built everything where they are the vendor of everything. And so they didn't have an integration problem. So we are doing the same. They have what they call the unboxed process, where they basically assemble things. Everything arrives from a bunch of different places, and it all ends up, boom. That's what we're doing too. And this is where Dynarly is so smart. And so what Tesla's doing, we are emulating in our own way. I don't pretend to be Elon Musk by any stretch. He's an amazing guy. But we're using the same high-speed manufacturing philosophy, standardizing everything, keeping it simple. And it's a quiet revolution.
I love the example with Tesla, because there's the other electric brand out of China that's doing that now too. I think it's Bird or Beard or however you say it.
BYD.
Yeah,
BYD.
BYD. So BYD, they're doing that pretty well now. They have everything in house, and of course, with it being in China, I don't know if it's up to code, but it doesn't really matter if it's in China. And at the same time, is you're having everything in house, so it's like every cost is lower. It's faster. You're your own supplier. So doing it that way, I've always seen that, especially as companies grow. That's always was one of the issues I looked at. PepsiCo was like, you guys are just going too far out. Like your suppliers are too far out. Because I was in the logistics space, so I'm sitting there listening to how their suppliers work, and I'm just like, but you can just do this in house. Why do you have a third party vendor for that? So the way that you guys are doing it, it may, like you said, is it's going to be capital heavy up front, but you're going to be able to build it in a way where it reduces friction for your customers. So that instead of it being like, well, it'll be there in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we got to build it and then it'll show up and then we'll install it. So it could be there tomorrow. If you got everything else done today somehow, then we could have it there tomorrow. It's like we could have it there in a week. We could have it there however long, but you have them sitting on the lot ready. But that also leads me to my question, which is what is the one thing that, whether in life or in business, that you are overcoming right now?
The number one thing I'm overcoming right now, and I think is a problem that every entrepreneur has, is team building. How do you scale a business? Well, you've got to keep growing your team. And up till about 2018, I really didn't have I was kind of all by myself raising money and then hoping that people would do stuff with the money. And of course, they wasted it. And after a while, you're like, why am I raising all this money? This is ridiculous. But in 2018, I started attracting, like our current chief operating officer, Tom Marchicello, Ken Berenger, who helped create Water on Demand with me. Dan Early joined us in 2018. He's the guru of this decentralization. Most recently, we had a gentleman, AJ Fikej, joined us from corporate America. And so, that to me is you end up with a mafia. I spent a little bit of time because I have family in film, and I spent a bit of time in film. And directors accumulate a mafia around them of people who go with them from film to film. And in fact, I worked on a Sam Raimi movie, and I was offered a chance to be part of that mafia, and ended up turning it down for tech. But it's kind of works the same ways. You create your mafia, and these are the people that you don't, it's like being an old couple. You don't have to like finish the sentence, right?
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing, so that you're literally thinking the same thought, and you get together in a Slack huddle, and you go blah blah. Okay, good, we're out. And to me, that kind of real time team operation is what makes it possible. I've been able to do personal projects. Like, for example, I help my wife with her school, and I'm the guy who takes the kids on ski trips because I hate skiing, right? That's why I do it. So we go on these school ski trips. Well, I'm actually able to do that and be, I'm obviously working in background, but I got a team that's like, okay, Riggs, we realize that you're having way too much fun on the slopes, but we got this. And that is such a dream when you can step away for a few days and it's okay, right?
Yeah, that's a great answer. I love that piece of it because, for every entrepreneur, that's the dream, I believe. Everyone talks about, well, hopefully, if you're really in business for the right reasons, you're talking about one of two things: is either building a team so that way you can have some kind of life outside of the business, or two, you're talking about exiting, which I know that you have experience in that too. But it's like, why are you building the company? I think so often when people ask, they don't ask themselves that question. Most of the time, it's just, well, I want to make money, I want to buy a car, I want to buy a house. But it's like, what's the real reason? Because for me, when I came home, which what we talked about beforehand, but when I came home, that was like my main objective, because that's my number one skill set, is leadership, more than anything else. So I knew how to hire people, I knew how to train them, and I knew how to get myself out of the daily operations really quick. And so that's what I did with our business. Was at first, of course, you're wearing every hat. As the founder, I wore every single hat until I got to a point where I could understand it. And then we got to a point in profit that we could hire other people. And then once we hired people, we trained them, and then I just got myself out of it. And that is where I realized what actual freedom was. Freedom wasn't making a certain dollar amount. Freedom was, well, I can actually go to Disney World with my family and I don't have to work. Like I can, and we actually still make money. Like that's the wild part is we actually were still getting paid and we weren't working, but the business kept going. And I love that example, and especially with that being one of the key metrics of success for you, it sounds like. So I just want to thank you for sharing that.
Listen, Stephen, it was a major revelation for me when I realized I was being a lone star. I was being a Superman, and Superman doesn't scale. It's League
Yeah.
of Avengers that scales, right?
Mm.
You got to be that team, because in League of Avengers, each of them has a different superpower, right? Well, Superman only has one, and then he's got, of course, he's got his fatal weakness, and he's around kryptonite. All of a sudden, he's now Superman. So you don't want to be the single point of failure, is what I'm trying to say. From an engineering point of view, if you think of corporations as being an engineering problem, then you really want to be able to have it doesn't rely on me not walking in front of a bus. You don't want to have that problem, right? So, you know, I love it. It actually came to me late. I was way too much of a superhero for too long, and it became real old. And also, I'd have ups and downs in life. Now we're jamming.
That's awesome. I'm so thankful for you joining me on the show today. Thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge with me and for everyone listening. So just one last time, thank you for joining me today.
Stephen, it's such a pleasure, and you have a good evening in Tulsa. I love talking to you.
Thank you. You have a great evening as well in Clearwater, Florida. To everyone else listening, I'll see you guys in the next episode.